Breaking news, President Trump is actively lobbying Republican senators personally, telling them to back one of his top nominees. Multiple sources are telling CNN that Trump is now involved in the confirmation process of Ed Martin, his pick to serve as U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C. Now, Martin is facing some Republican skepticism on Capitol Hill over past controversial statements and media appearances. Paula Reed broke this reporting, and she's out front. I mean, Paula, the president getting personally involved here. What more are you learning?
Lauren, this isn't just any nominee. This is Trump's favorite U.S. attorney nominee, I am told by a source. And this resistance is, of course, coming from his own party, which is why the president is having to get on the phone to try to get this across the line. Among those lawmakers with some reservations, North Carolina lawmaker Tom Tillis. He has serious questions, he says, about Martin's nomination, specifically as it relates to comments Martin made about police who defended the Capitol on January 6th. We've also learned that Senators Cornyn and Cruz have privately expressed concerns about this controversial nominee, but a White House official tells me the White House continues to be confident that Martin will be confirmed despite his many controversies that I know you have covered extensively on the show, including his failure to disclose nearly 200 media appearances in his official paperwork, as well as claiming he did not recall some of his most controversial statements. Now, the clock is ticking for him to convert hearts and minds about his confirmation. He has to be confirmed by May 20th because he's an interim right now. If they aren't able to do that, then they'll have to pursue a different process. And one option, Aaron, is for Judge James Boasberg, an Obama-appointed judge who has drawn the ire of President Trump and his allies for some decisions he has made opposing Trump policies. He could potentially pick the next U.S. attorney in D.C.
All right, Paula, thank you very much. Right now, former Trump White House lawyer Ty Cobb. Paula is saying there that reporting the date really matters here because that would obviously, if it goes that other way after May 20th, change things completely. So Trump's personally involved. You heard Paula reporting on what appear to be reservations by some very prominent Republican senators. She mentioned Cornyn and Cruz, Senators Cornyn and Cruz. So what do you think when you hear that Trump is personally getting involved in trying to get Ed Martin's confirmation through the Senate?
Well, I think it's unfortunate. It really shows, again, how low this president is willing to go to get loyalists into positions that they're unqualified for and really have no business having. Trying to force Ed Martin into the U.S. Attorney's position is like trying to take, somebody off the subway with two broken arms and make him the starting third baseman for the Washington Nationals. The reality is this guy is not qualified. His entire office is demoralized. Over 100 lawyers who are former assistants in that office have worked there and had great reputations, have written letters and lobbied very hard to try to prevent the office from suffering this level of an indignity. This is a guy, yes, he did fail to disclose 200 media appearances, and he has revised his submissions to the Senate multiple times as some of those have leaked out. But it's not just 200 media appearances. These are 200 media appearances on Russian media. This is not somebody who's, talking about Good Morning America. This is somebody who has a very sordid background, no prosecutorial experience. He's gone after congressmen and women merely for criticizing the president and threatened prosecution. And he has fired, everybody that had anything to do with the January 6th prosecutions, all of which, as we know, most of which resulted in convictions and sentences and had to be the subject of pardons. So this is not somebody that deserves this office. This is not somebody who's qualified. And the fact that Trump is on the phone just shows how low he's willing to go. Sadly, with regard to Senator Tillis, who's had concerns about Kennedy, he had concerns about Kash Patel, he had concerns about Hegseth, those concerns have not amounted to anything, at all because he's voted for all of them, and he's likely to do that here, which would be unfortunate.
So the context here also is Trump, in this interview he gave this weekend with NBC's Kristen Welker, he did not say he'd uphold the Constitution. Obviously, the oath you swear when you take the office of the presidency is to do just that. It's the most core thing. But she was asking about due process for Americans and non-citizens. Okay, that was the context of her question. And let me just play their exchange.
Don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?
I don't know.
Again, the context here was due process, right? So it's right on that Abrego Garcia line, and that was the context of her question. But the answer was the answer that he gave. Does it surprise you to hear that from him?
Not necessarily, but I don't think it really is a considered response. I think this is a Trump who, always is looking to give himself a little bit of wiggle room. He doesn't want to commit to anything that might tie him down. On the other hand, he is the first president in 240 years who has any doubts about whether his responsibility is to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution as he takes an oath to do. It is, we already have a situation where he has refused to uphold the Constitution. He has refused to facilitate the return of Abrego Garcia, notwithstanding the Supreme Court's admonition that he's to do so. And he was called out last week by Judge Beryl Howe in D.C. for violating the constitutional rights with regard to, or violating the Constitution in multiple regard with regard to the Perkins Coie law firm and the other law firm assaults that he's on. He has willy-nilly violated the Constitution with impunity and will continue to do so absent Supreme Court, showing him where the line is. And that's what he's asked for, and he needs them.
So the Supreme Court's showing him the line. I guess the question is, will he follow those rulings? I mean, when it comes to deportation policies, he was asked whether he would follow the Supreme Court, even if he disagreed with a ruling that came out. Here's how he answered that question.
I have to respond by saying again, I have brilliant lawyers that work for me, and they are going to obviously follow what the Supreme Court said.
So, is that a good enough answer?
Well, I'm not sure who the brilliant lawyers are, but they do have to follow what the Supreme Court says, and the failure to do so will only further, erode the confidence that people have already started to lose in what's going on with government and Trump generally. I think you're seeing that reflected in the polls. I think you see some of that reflected in some of the softness that he's now trying to add this week in terms of suggesting that he might do what the Supreme Court directs him to do. I hope that he will. I believe that he will. I think he'll be forced to, certainly in regards to many of these things that we're now seeing with regard to immigration and the law firms and the attacks on Harvard and other institutions.
All right. Thank you very much, Ty. Good to see you.